It was supposed to be a celebration of love. 20 years of marriage, 2 decades of promises kept, of struggles endured together, of building a life that others often admired from a distance. The restaurant glowed with soft candlelight, silverware clinked against china, and laughter carried across the table. Family, friends, colleagues, all gathered to honor what looked like a perfect union. I sat there, my hand resting gently on the stem of a glass of champagne, my smile fixed as people toasted to us, to what they believed was a marriage built on trust and loyalty. My husband sat at my side, charming as ever, nodding, shaking hands, thanking everyone for their kind words. Across from me sat the woman I once called my sister in everything but blood, my best friend Rachel. Her smile was wide, her eyes shining, and for a moment, I thought she was simply happy for us, as she had always been. But then she stood up. She placed her hand across her stomach and cleared her throat, her voice trembling just enough to make the room fall silent. "I have something important to share," she said. The guests leaned in, expectant, curious, still in the glow of our anniversary celebration. And then with a nervous laugh, she announced words that cut through the air like glass shattering against tile. "I'm pregnant, and Michael is the father." There was a collective gasp. My chest tightened. My ears rang. Every face at the table turned toward me, waiting, measuring the silence that followed. Michael shifted beside me, his fingers drumming against the tablecloth, his eyes refusing to meet mine. And me? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I reached for my glass, lifted it steadily and forced a smile. "A toast," I whispered to the stunned room. At that moment, nobody could guess what was about to unfold. I remember the first time I met Michael. It was at a small community event in Boston, one of those charity dinners where people pretended to be more polished than they really were. He walked in late, the kind of man who carried himself as though the room already belonged to him. He was confident without trying, and I noticed the way people's eyes followed him, the way they leaned in when he spoke. He found his way to my table, introduced himself with that smile of his, and before the night ended, I was laughing at jokes that weren't even that funny. There was something magnetic about him, something that made me feel chosen. The days that followed were filled with the kind of gestures women dream about. Flowers arriving at my office for no reason, long phone calls that stretched into the early hours of the morning, and sudden weekend getaways that felt pulled from the pages of a romance novel. He promised me forever, not with grand speeches, but with quiet reassurances, the kind that seeped into my bones and made me believe that, at last, I had found someone who would never let me go. Within a year we were married, and soon after we moved into a house in the suburbs, the type with white shutters and a freshly painted porch swing. People would stop by and say we looked like the couple from a magazine cover, the kind of marriage others wish they had. It wasn't long before Rachel entered the picture more fully. I had known her since college, but after graduation, our paths often drifted. When she moved back to the city, I welcomed her into my life like family. Rachel was the one I called when I needed advice, the one who knew my favorite ice cream flavor without asking, the one who could walk into my home and make herself at ease in my kitchen. Michael liked her too. He always said she was funny, that she brought life into any room. Sometimes I would find the two of them laughing at some joke I hadn't caught, and I felt grateful that my husband and my best friend got along so well. What more could a woman ask for? We built routines that seemed unshakable. Sunday mornings meant coffee on the porch with the newspaper sprawled across the table. Holidays were spent hosting friends and family, Michael carving the turkey while Rachel poured the wine. Birthdays turned into small gatherings where laughter filled every corner of our home. And yet, even in the midst of those picture-perfect moments, there were things I didn't allow myself to think too deeply about. Michael's phone, for example, was never far from his hand, and when it rang late at night, he would step outside to take the call. I once asked him who it was, and he said work. I believed him because to question him felt like questioning the very foundation of the life we had built. There was also the necklace. I remember walking into our bedroom one evening and finding a small jewelry box tucked inside his drawer. It wasn't wrapped, and curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a delicate gold chain with a tiny heart pendant. My chest swelled with excitement because I thought it was meant for me, perhaps a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. But that anniversary came and went, and no necklace appeared. I asked him casually if he had forgotten, and he smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'll make it up to you." I wanted to press him, but instead, I pushed the thought aside, convincing myself it had been nothing more than a misplaced purchase. Rachel, too, had moments that in hindsight should have raised alarms. She would cancel plans with me last minute, but later mention something Michael had told her, details about his work or his schedule, things I didn't remember sharing. Sometimes she would show up in a new dress, laughing about how Michael said it was her color. At the time I brushed it off, thinking that was just Rachel being Rachel. Open, flirtatious, never holding back what she thought. And I told myself Michael was simply being polite. After all, wasn't it good that the two people I cared about most got along so well? Looking back, I realize how easily we blind ourselves when we want to protect the life we think we've secured. I saw only what I wanted to see. A devoted husband, a loyal friend, a future that was safe and certain. But certainty is fragile. And I would learn soon enough that the perfect life we present to the world often hides fractures too fine for others to see. Those fractures were already there in my marriage, but I smoothed over them, refusing to let myself acknowledge the cracks. Because if I did, I would have to admit that the picture-perfect life I cherished might not have been real at all. And so I smiled through the dinners, the gatherings, the quiet moments on the porch, believing the illusion, clinging to it as if by holding on tightly enough, I could keep it from slipping away. I didn't know then that the very people I trusted most, the man I vowed to love forever and the woman I called my sister, were already writing a different story behind my back. I didn't see it. I didn't want to. And by the time I finally did, it was already too late. It started slowly, so slowly that if I hadn't been paying attention, I might have missed it altogether. At first, it was the late nights. Michael had always been dedicated to his work, often putting in extra hours, but something about these late nights felt different. He no longer called to let me know he'd be home late. Instead, he would simply walk through the door long after I had gone to bed, smelling faintly of cologne and city air. When I asked how his day had been, his answers became shorter, more clipped. Busy, he would say, before changing the subject. At first, I accepted it. I told myself this was what marriage looked like after so many years. The comfort of routine, the demands of life, the ebb and flow of romance. But the unease began to creep in, subtle but steady, each late night another small crack in the picture-perfect life we had built. I would sit on the couch, staring at the clock, telling myself not to read into it. Yet the silence of the house pressed against me, reminding me that something was shifting. Then came the phone calls. He started stepping outside to take them, even in the middle of dinner. I remember once, he was laughing with me over takeout Chinese, his chopsticks hovering in the air, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression changed. He stood quickly, muttered something about needing to take this, and walked out onto the porch. I sat there alone, the sound of the TV filling the room, the sweet and sour chicken cooling on my plate. When he came back, he avoided my eyes. I asked who it was, and he smiled in that easy way of his, the one that always seemed to erase my doubts. Work, he said. Just work. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Rachel, meanwhile, seemed to be everywhere Michael was. If I mentioned he was busy with late meetings, she would suddenly call to ask if I wanted company. If Michael and I planned a weekend dinner, Rachel would happen to drop by with a bottle of wine, laughing about how she just had a feeling we'd be home. She was always available, always hovering on the edges of my marriage, and yet I convinced myself it was coincidence. After all, she was my best friend. What reason would I have to question her intentions? There were moments that gnawed at me, though I buried them quickly, like the time I overheard her teasing Michael about a baseball game, mentioning a detail I hadn't shared with her. Or when I saw her wearing a perfume I distinctly remembered Michael saying he liked. Each time I forced the thoughts away. Paranoia, I told myself. That was all it was. Paranoia. Because to consider the alternative was to unravel everything I had believed in, everything I had built my life upon. But doubt has a way of growing roots. It spread through me quietly, making me restless, making me watch more closely. I began noticing the way Michael's phone was always face down on the counter, how he would slide it into his pocket the second I walked into the room. I noticed how Rachel's eyes lingered a little too long when he spoke, how their laughter seemed to carry a secret rhythm I wasn't part of. My stomach tightened with every observation, but still, I clung to the belief that I was imagining it. That if I loved them both enough, the thoughts would fade. And then came the night that changed everything. Michael had been out late again, claiming he was stuck at a client dinner. I decided to tidy up the study while I waited for him. That was when I found it, folded neatly inside his desk drawer, almost as if it were meant to be hidden but not forgotten. A small slip of paper, a receipt. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. It was from a jewelry store downtown, dated just 2 weeks earlier. The item, one gold necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. My heart sank because I knew instantly it wasn't for me. He hadn't given me a necklace in years, and certainly not this one. I stared at that receipt, my chest tightening, my breath uneven. In that moment, every late night, every hushed phone call, every laugh shared between Michael and Rachel came rushing back, crashing into me with a force that made my knees weaken. I sat down in the study chair, the paper clutched in my hand, unable to move, unable to deny what was beginning to take shape in my mind. I wanted desperately to be wrong. I wanted to believe there was another explanation. But deep down I knew. And though I couldn't yet prove it, I felt the ground shift beneath me. My marriage was no longer what it seemed. My best friend was no longer who I thought she was. And in that quiet, suffocating moment, staring at that receipt, I realized the illusion I had clung to so tightly was beginning to shatter. The receipt haunted me. I tucked it into the back of my journal, hidden between pages of half-written notes and to-do lists, but it never left my mind. Every time Michael left the house, I thought of that gold heart-shaped pendant. Every time Rachel smiled at me, I wondered if it was lying in a velvet box on her dresser. It was as if a veil had lifted, and now everywhere I looked, I saw pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind or too trusting to put together. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself that marriages are built on trust, and that after so many years together, I owed him that much. But when the lights went out at night, and I lay in bed listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing beside me, the questions clawed at me until sleep became a stranger. I would stare at the ceiling, asking myself if I was losing my mind, if I was inventing reasons to be unhappy. Some nights I even whispered apologies to him in my head, ashamed for doubting him, ashamed for letting suspicion live between us. And yet, the doubt never faded. It grew. Michael's absences became harder to ignore. He stopped leaving his suits at the dry cleaners near our house, and instead dropped them off at one across town. When I asked why, he laughed and said the service was better. But when I picked up his jacket one afternoon to hang it, I caught the faint scent of a woman's perfume clinging to the fabric. Something floral, sweet, and unmistakably not mine. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. I wanted to see more. I needed to be sure. Rachel, too, began to falter in ways she didn't notice. She would slip details into conversations that she shouldn't have known, tiny cracks in her performance as the loyal friend. Once, she mentioned that Michael hated olives in his salad, something I had never shared with her. Another time, she laughed about how he had been stressed over a presentation I hadn't even known about. I asked her casually how she knew, and she brushed it off, saying Michael must have mentioned it in passing. But I knew he hadn't, at least not to me. The emotional toll of carrying these suspicions nearly broke me. I would plaster on a smile during gatherings, laugh at jokes, host dinners, and play the part of the devoted wife while inside I was unraveling. My appetite dwindled. I picked at my meals, my stomach twisting at the thought of sitting across from them both, pretending nothing was wrong. At night, I lay awake long after Michael had fallen asleep, my mind racing with images I didn't want to see. His hand on Rachel's arm, her head tilted back in laughter, the necklace gleaming against her collarbone. But despite the torment, I didn't confront him. Not yet. To scream, to accuse, to demand answers without proof would give them the upper hand. I knew Michael's charm, the way he could turn any accusation into an overreaction on my part. I knew Rachel's tears, the way she could twist herself into the victim. No, I wouldn't give them that. Instead, I decided to do what I had never done before. I would watch. Quietly. Patiently. I would collect every piece of evidence until there was no denying it, no explaining it away. So I began to take mental notes. When Michael left for a supposed late-night meeting, I checked the clock, memorizing the exact time he walked out the door. I noted how long it took for him to return, how his mood shifted when he did. When Rachel called, I listened more carefully, catching the pauses in her voice, the way she sometimes seemed to hesitate before answering my questions. I didn't say a word. I let them think I was blind. Let them believe I was still the trusting wife and the loyal friend. But inside, I was awake now. My instincts had finally broken through the walls I had built around them, and I refused to ignore them any longer. I know this story is heavy, but if you've ever had your gut scream something was wrong, share this video. You might help someone realize they're not crazy for trusting their instincts. The more I paid attention, the more the lies revealed themselves. Michael started keeping his phone on silent, the screen lighting up in the dark when he thought I was asleep. Once, when he left it on the nightstand to take a shower, I glanced at it just for a second. A text flashed across the screen. It was from Rachel. The words were simple. Call me when you can. But in the stillness of that moment, they felt louder than any scream. My throat closed, my hands shook, but I forced myself not to touch the phone. I couldn't risk leaving any trace of suspicion. I carried the weight of these discoveries alone. I didn't tell my sister, my mother, or even my closest colleague. To speak the words out loud would make them real, and I wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, I bottled it up, telling myself the time would come when the truth would step into the light. Until then, I would keep playing the role they had written for me. The wife who never doubted, the friend who never questioned. But in the quiet of my mind, I was no longer either of those things. One evening, as I was folding laundry, I reached into the pocket of Michael's slacks and pulled out another slip of paper. It was a receipt again, this time from a small boutique I didn't recognize. The purchase, a silk scarf in a deep shade of red. I stared at it, my hands trembling, my chest hollow. That scarf had never been gifted to me. I closed my eyes, and in that instant, I saw Rachel's laughter, her voice echoing in my ears, her perfume clinging to the air around Michael's suit. I gripped the receipt tightly in my hand, my nails digging into the paper, my breath caught in my throat. It was no longer a question of if. It was now a question of when. It was a warm summer evening, the kind where neighbors wandered into each other's yards with plates of ribs and potato salad, where laughter floated through the air with the smell of grilled corn and charcoal. Michael had insisted on hosting a small barbecue in our backyard, inviting friends, family, and, of course, Rachel. I played the part as I always did, smiling, refilling drinks, laughing in the right places. No one would have guessed that under the surface my chest was tight, my mind alert, watching every detail like a hawk. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and slowly, people began to drift away. Children clutched melting ice cream cones, couples held hands as they strolled to their cars, and soon the lively crowd had thinned until only a few remained. I excused myself, carrying a tray of empty glasses inside, letting the door swing shut behind me. My hands moved automatically, rinsing, stacking, wiping, though my ears remained tuned to the faint hum of voices drifting from the patio. I hadn't meant to stop. I hadn't meant to linger. But as I placed the last glass on the rack, I heard it. A whisper too low to be casual, too urgent to be harmless. I froze, towel still in my hands, and leaned against the counter, straining to catch the words. Rachel's voice. When will you tell her? She asked, her tone frayed with tension. She's my best friend, Michael. This is killing me. My entire body went cold. My knees weakened beneath me. And for a moment I thought I might collapse right there on the tiled floor. I pressed a hand to the counter to steady myself, every muscle rigid, my breath shallow. Michael's reply was muffled, but I heard enough. Not yet. She's not ready. I'll handle it, Rachel. Trust me. The towel slipped from my grasp, crumpling silently to the floor. My ears rang, drowning out the rest of their hushed exchange. In that instant, everything I had feared was confirmed, not just the late nights, the perfume, the receipts, the texts. It was real. They were real. And worse than real, it was personal. It wasn't a stranger, not some faceless woman I could have despised and dismissed. It was Rachel. My Rachel, the girl who had held my hand through heartbreaks in high school, who had stood beside me in my wedding photos, who had rocked my children to sleep when I was too exhausted to go on. The betrayal wasn't only in my marriage, it was in my very foundation. I slid down against the kitchen cabinet, my head buried in my hands, silent tears streaking down my face. The weight of it pressed into my chest, threatening to suffocate me. I thought of every secret I had ever whispered to her, every confidence shared, every moment of vulnerability. And now, she had taken the one vow I thought sacred, the promise between a wife and her husband, and shattered it without hesitation. In that moment, a storm raged inside me. Rage clawed at my insides, demanding release, begging me to storm outside and scream, to shatter the glass in their hands, to call them out for what they were. Betrayers. Liars. Thieves of trust. My pulse pounded in my ears, hot and furious, and my hands curled into fists. But then something inside me shifted. I breathed deeply, forcing the fury back down, letting the tears dry where they fell. I realized what neither of them knew. They thought I was blind. They thought I was still in the dark, still the naive wife and the trusting friend. They thought they controlled the game. But in that moment, in the silence of my kitchen, I understood something that steadied me like nothing else had before. If they wanted a game, I would be the one writing the rules. I wiped my face, lifted my chin, and rose to my feet with a resolve that felt foreign and powerful. My hands no longer trembled. My heart no longer wavered. Let them whisper in corners and hide behind lies. Let them believe I was too weak, too fragile to see the truth. They had underestimated me. And in that underestimation, they had already lost. When I stepped back outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Sharper. Rachel looked up from where she sat, her laughter quick and easy, though her eyes darted toward Michael like a secret tether held between them. Michael glanced at me too, his smile practiced, his arm brushing casually against hers as if by accident. I smiled back at them, wide, warm, convincing. No one would know. But inside I had crossed a threshold. I was no longer the woman begging the ceiling for answers at midnight, no longer the wife shrinking beneath doubt, No longer the friend aching with confusion. I was something else now. I was deliberate. I was watchful. I was ready. Every betrayal has its breaking point. That night I reached mine. And what they didn't know, what they couldn't yet imagine, was that the very second they broke me, I began building the weapon that would destroy them. From that night forward I became two women. To the world I was still Emily, the doting wife, the loyal friend, the hostess who laughed at barbecues and baked pies for church events. But underneath that mask, another version of me began to take form. Quiet, calculated, watchful. I started small. My mornings, once filled with restless pacing and unanswered questions, became dedicated to observation. Michael had grown careless in his comfort, convinced of my ignorance. His phone, always within reach, now became my silent ally. I noticed patterns, late-night texts, hushed calls in the garage, receipts tucked hastily into his wallet. And when opportunity knocked, I was ready. One evening, as he showered, I unlocked his phone using the code I had memorized long ago, one he thought I had forgotten. My hands trembled as I scrolled, but I forced myself steady. Message after message confirmed what I already knew. Rachel. Sweetheart. My love. The word seared into me, but instead of breaking, I pressed screenshot, with deliberate precision. Each capture became another nail in their coffin, carefully stored in a hidden folder only I could access. Bank statements came next. Michael had grown generous. Hotel reservations, unexplained withdrawals, dinners at places he had never once taken me. I logged into our accounts at dawn while he slept beside me, each click unraveling his double life. I printed statements in secret, tucking them into a manila envelope buried deep beneath old photo albums in the attic. I became skilled at deception. Every smile I gave, every laugh I forced, every warm gesture toward Rachel became another layer of camouflage. They believed me oblivious, and I let them. They underestimated me at every turn, never realizing that my silence was not weakness, but strategy. Rachel slipped too. She spoke too freely when wine softened her tongue. At a coffee date, she mentioned Michael's funny little scar on his shoulder, a detail she could not have known unless she had been close enough to trace it with her fingers. I smiled, stirring my cappuccino as if her words hadn't sliced me open. Later that night, I wrote the detail down in my journal, one more piece of evidence in a puzzle I was quietly completing. The hardest part wasn't the gathering, it was the acting. Pretending to be blind while I saw everything. Sleeping beside a man whose touch repulsed me, hugging a friend whose arms still carried the scent of betrayal. But I endured it because revenge is not born in haste. It is crafted in silence, sharpened by patience. Weeks passed and my envelope grew thick. Screenshots, statements, photographs, even voice recordings of their late-night whispers I captured with the hidden app. Every secret they thought safe now rested in my possession. And with each piece my resolve deepened. I knew their arrogance would be their undoing. They paraded their affair in shadows, believing themselves untouchable. But shadows can be dragged into light. When the anniversary drew near, Michael suggested dinner at home, casual, intimate. I agreed with a smile, knowing better. I had already made a call of my own. I booked a table at the very restaurant where we had celebrated our first anniversary years ago. A place filled with memories of promises he had long since broken. As I hung up the phone, my lips curved into a smile that wasn't born of joy, but of purpose. The stage was set, the players unaware. And in that single moment, the story shifted. Because they thought the dinner would be about celebration. But I knew. It would be the beginning of their downfall. The day of the dinner arrived, and with it, a storm I kept locked tightly behind my ribs. On the surface, I was every inch the loving wife preparing for a milestone celebration. I wore the dress Michael once said was his favorite, a deep shade of emerald that caught the light like glass. My hair was pinned back in soft curls, my lips painted in a smile I rehearsed in the mirror. But inside, every beat of my heart pulsed with rage I refused to release too soon. The restaurant had been my choice, a place layered with history. It was there, years ago, that Michael had raised a glass to forever, his eyes soft with promises he never intended to keep. Now, I had reserved the same corner table, under the golden chandelier, near the piano that played slow, haunting melodies. I wanted symbolism. I wanted irony. I wanted him to choke on nostalgia before the truth carved into him. The manager greeted me warmly when I arrived earlier than anyone else. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Collins," he said with a smile. He had no idea that this anniversary would be remembered not for love, but for revelation. I walked the room, inspecting every detail. The flowers were fresh, white lilies, chosen not for romance but for their subtle reminder of funerals. The candles flickered against polished glassware, their flames bending like secrets waiting to be spilled. Soon the guests began to arrive. Family members, friends, co-workers, all dressed in their finest, ready to toast to love and longevity. I embraced each one, my arms steady, my voice warm. I played the part with flawless precision, though beneath it all, my chest felt heavy, as if carrying a secret too vast for flesh to contain. When Rachel walked in, her hand slipped into mine with a squeeze too familiar, her smile radiant as if this night were hers to claim. She wore a crimson dress, bold and striking, the kind a woman wears when she wants to be seen. I held her gaze, steady and unwavering, while inside I thought, of course you would wear red, Rachel. The color of warning. The color of blood. Then came Michael, charming as ever, his arm sweeping around my waist as though the bond between us were unshakable. He kissed my cheek in front of everyone, his lips warm but empty, and whispered, "You look stunning tonight." I smiled back, tilting my head just enough to let him believe his act was working. He didn't notice the flicker in my eyes, the shadow that lingered just behind my calm. The room soon swelled with laughter and conversation. Glasses clinked, plates were served, and the air filled with the aroma of roasted meats, buttered vegetables, and sweet wines. To anyone watching, it was the portrait of joy, of a marriage still thriving after years of trials. But to me, every laugh scraped across my ears like glass, every toast an insult to the woman I had been forced to become. I sat at the head of the table, the place of honor, smiling and nodding as stories were shared about Michael and me. His sister reminisced about our wedding day, her voice tinged with nostalgia. A friend teased about how Michael once forgot my birthday and spent a week groveling. Laughter rippled through the group, and Michael leaned in to kiss my hand, the perfect husband for the perfect scene. But I knew better. I knew the man beside me was a stranger wearing my husband's face. Every time Rachel laughed at one of his jokes, my stomach tightened. Every time his eyes darted to her when he thought no one noticed, my pulse quickened. And yet my expression never cracked. I clinked my glass, I laughed on cue. I played the part so flawlessly that even Rachel, who should have sensed the shift in me, saw nothing. But beneath the table, my fingers curled into my napkin, twisting it until the fabric strained. Inside my chest, my heart burned not from sorrow anymore, but from anticipation. The game was nearing its climax, and they had no idea they were the pawns being maneuvered toward checkmate. The pianist began to play softly, a melody Michael and I had once danced to. He looked at me then, his eyes flickering with something almost like sincerity, perhaps guilt, perhaps longing. But I didn't let it pierce me. His performance no longer touched me, because I knew where his loyalties lay when the lights dimmed. As dessert was served and wine poured into waiting glasses, I glanced around the table at the faces of those who believed they were here for a celebration. But they were witnesses in disguise. Witnesses to a truth I was about to unmask. I took a deep breath, the weight of the night pressing on my chest. My mask held firm, my smile lingered. But inside I whispered to myself, "Steady now, Emily. Don't rush. They'll never see it coming." And with that thought I raised my glass, ready to deliver words that would turn a celebration into a reckoning. Rachel's chair scraped against the polished floor as she stood, her crimson dress catching the glow of the chandelier like a flame. She tapped her glass lightly with a spoon, the delicate chime drawing every conversation to a halt. Laughter dimmed, forks stilled, and eyes turned toward her, expectant and warm, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface of the night. Her smile trembled with a rehearsed fragility, the kind meant to appear innocent, vulnerable, deserving of sympathy. She clasped her hands against her chest, her eyes darting briefly to Michael before settling on the guests. And then, with a breath that quivered for effect, she spoke words that cracked the evening in two. I have some news," she began, her voice heavy with false humility. "Something so important, I couldn't keep it to myself any longer." She paused, glancing around the table as if inviting their curiosity to build. Then her lips parted, and the words spilled out like poison dressed as joy. "I'm pregnant." Gasps cut through the air, sharp and unsteady. Wine glasses were lowered mid-sip. Forks clattered against porcelain. The once celebratory hum of the room collapsed into whispers that rippled like fire across dry leaves. Faces turned toward her, stunned, mouths slightly open, trying to reconcile the announcement with the occasion. Rachel's eyes glistened as though she were on the verge of tears, her fingers pressing over her flat stomach in a gesture meant to soften her revelation. But it wasn't her words alone that shattered the night, it was the timing. At my anniversary dinner. At our table. Surrounded by our family. And then came Michael. He pushed his chair back slowly, the legs scraping with a sound that grated against my bones. His face twisted into something between shock and panic, but it was the wrong kind of shock. Not disbelief. Not surprise. It was the shock of being caught too soon, of realizing the script had slipped from his hands. His mouth opened, fumbling for a response. Rachel, what are you saying? His voice cracked, weak, unconvincing. He glanced at me, then back at her, as though unsure of which role to play. But his eyes betrayed him. They darted with guilt, flickered with recognition, and in that instant the performance failed. Time slowed for me. The room's noise dulled, and it was as though I were submerged underwater, watching the scene unfold through a warped lens. I saw my guests' faces tilt toward one another in hushed disbelief. I saw Michael's hands tremble against the edge of the table. I saw Rachel, glowing with the satisfaction of her reveal, her head held high, daring me with her eyes to crumble in front of everyone. Inside, my chest caved with the force of betrayal, but my exterior did not falter. My breathing was steady, my expression unchanged, though I could feel the blood roaring in my ears. It was as though my body had split in two, the part that felt the devastation, and the part that observed it coldly, calculating, holding fast to the power of silence. Rachel's words hung heavy in the air, unanswered, echoing in every corner of the restaurant. I could feel the weight of every gaze shifting between the three of us, searching for meaning, for confirmation, for cracks in the facade. And yet I said nothing. Not a single syllable escaped my lips. My silence wrapped around me like armor, thick and impenetrable. It was my choice, my weapon. For what could possibly wound them more than my refusal to give them a scene? So I sat there, still and composed, sipping my wine as though she had merely commented on the weather. My stillness unnerved them all, especially Michael, who now squirmed under the pressure of my unreadable calm. Rachel had expected shock, outrage, perhaps even tears. But instead, she found herself exposed, her triumph soured by the lack of reaction. Without my explosion, her announcement hung awkwardly, stripped of its intended power. I glanced around the table, taking in the shifting eyes, the uneasy shuffling, the whispers that began to swell once more. And I thought to myself, this is only the beginning. They think this is the climax, but they don't yet know the story has barely begun. Would you have stayed silent like I did, or exploded right there at the table? Comment below. I want to hear how you would have handled it. And while you're at it, hit subscribe, because these true stories are only going to get deeper. I lifted my glass slowly, the stem cool against my fingers, the ruby red liquid inside shimmering under the chandelier. The room was still trembling from Rachel's announcement, whispers buzzing like restless bees, but my calm cut through it like a knife. I rose to my feet with the same poise I had perfected over years of swallowing my pain, and every head turned toward me as though instinctively drawn to the eye of the storm. My lips curved into a soft smile, one that betrayed nothing of the fire raging in my chest. Well, I began, my voice steady, warm even. It seems tonight has brought more surprises than we expected. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the weight beneath my words, yet unable to look away. I raised my glass slightly higher, eyes locking on Rachel, whose smirk was faltering under the tension. Rachel, congratulations, I said, the syllables smooth, deliberate, laced with a sweetness that stung like honey covering poison. A new life is always something to be celebrated. Rachel's cheeks flushed, though whether from pride or unease, it was hard to tell. Michael glanced at me with wide eyes, confused, as though my composure unsettled him more than any outburst could. And then I let the silence linger, just long enough for everyone to believe that perhaps I would sit back down, just long enough for Rachel to relax, for Michael to breathe. But then, I placed my glass down gently, the sound of crystal against wood echoing like a gavel striking at the start of a trial. I reached for my purse, my movements slow, precise, deliberate. My heart was pounding, but my face betrayed nothing. I withdrew a neat stack of folded papers, then a small envelope, and finally my phone. I thought, I continued softly, that since we're sharing tonight, perhaps I should share too. A ripple of unease swept across the table. I unfolded the first paper, and laid it flat for the guests nearest to me to see. The hush grew deeper as eyes widened at the sight, screenshots of text messages. Rachel's name at the top. Her words, shameless, explicit, detailing meetings, stolen afternoons, and promises of a future with my husband. The chain was long, undeniable, stretching across weeks, months. Gasps rose, chairs shifted, and suddenly people leaned closer, their curiosity uncontainable. I passed the next sheet, then another. Hotel receipts bearing Michael's name, time-stamped at hours he had sworn to me he'd been working late. Credit card charges for dinners, jewelry, even a spa weekend that I had never experienced. Every piece of paper landed like a hammer, cracking the facade of the evening into shards too sharp to ignore. But I wasn't finished. With one calm breath I tapped my phone, and the room filled with the sound of Rachel's voice, recorded, trembling yet triumphant, as she whispered on a call to Michael about their future together, about how she couldn't wait for me to finally be out of the way. The recording played on, each word like acid poured into the ears of our guests. Rachel's face drained of color, her hands shaking as she tried to stammer. That's not what it sounds like. But her denial was drowned by the sound of her own voice repeating promises to the man sitting beside me. Michael's face went crimson, then pale, then blotched as though the truth were clawing its way out through his skin. His lips parted, fumbling for explanations that wouldn't come. Emily, I can explain, he choked, but his words dissolved under the evidence sprawled across the table. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the back of my chair, my gaze sweeping across the room. My voice, when it came again, was calm, steady, final. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I let the truth do all the work. The silence that followed was deafening. Not a whisper dared to rise. Not a fork dared to scrape a plate. Only the weight of shame, betrayal, and revelation hung heavy in the air, pressing down on Michael and Rachel until their shoulders seemed to bow beneath it. I reached once more for my glass, lifted it again, and this time, my smile was genuine. To honesty, I said, and the crystal chimed as I sipped. Around me, no one raised their glasses. Eyes were fixed on me, some filled with pity, others with awe, but all with the unshakable knowledge that the power in the room no longer belonged to them. Michael stammered again, desperate, broken. Emily, please, it's not what you think. His words collapsed on themselves, flimsy, pitiful, meaningless. Rachel sat frozen, her lips trembling, her eyes darting toward the door as though escape might save her from the wreckage of her own making. But I remained standing, tall and unyielding, my calmness a blade sharper than any rage could have been, and as the silence stretched, I knew. The war they had started was finally in my hands. The room erupted in a chaos so loud and raw it was almost unbearable. Forks clattered against plates, chairs scraped back across the polished floor. Voices rose in sharp bursts of disbelief. What had started as a celebratory dinner had imploded into something far uglier. A stage where secrets bled openly and masks tore away with ruthless speed. Some guests stood immediately, muttering under their breath as they grabbed coats and purses, unable to bear the spectacle. Others lingered, stunned, whispering to each other as though needing to confirm what they had just witnessed was real. The laughter that had once filled the air only an hour earlier had been replaced with gasps, accusations, and shame. Rachel shot up from her chair so suddenly her wine glass tipped, red liquid spilling across the white linen like a wound spreading fast. She was pale, trembling, yet her pride fought to hold her upright. "This isn't true," she cried, her voice cracking, echoing through the room as though volume alone could erase the evidence I had laid bare. "She's twisting things. This is her jealousy talking." But the words were hollow. No one moved to comfort her. No one rose to defend her. The recording still echoed in the minds of every guest, her own voice damning her more effectively than I ever could. Michael remained seated, slumped forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if the wood itself could anchor him from drowning. His face was a storm of shame and desperation, his eyes darting between me and the horrified faces of our guests. At last he rose too, stumbling around the table, reaching for me with trembling hands. "Emily, please," he whispered, his voice thick with panic. "Please, I can explain. Don't do this here. Not in front of them. Let's go home, we can talk, we can fix this." But I didn't move. I stood as still as stone, his pleas bouncing off me like rain against glass. Every apology he scrambled for came too late. Every promise now a broken echo of words I'd once believed. His eyes searched mine for softness, for forgiveness, for the familiar woman who had once carried his burdens and excused his flaws. But she was gone. Rachel's control crumbled in front of everyone. Tears streaked her face as she screamed, "You don't understand. He loves me. He said he was going to leave her for me." Her voice cracked again, and the sound tore through the air, jagged and pitiful. Gasps rippled around the room, her confession ringing louder than any denial could. Someone near the door shook their head, muttering, "How disgusting." Another guest whispered to their companion, "The betrayal," and with her best friend, a hush of judgment swept the room, isolating Rachel and Michael until they stood alone in their disgrace. Rachel shoved her chair back so hard it nearly toppled, her heels clicking furiously against the floor as she stormed toward the exit. Her sobs filled the hallway as the door slammed behind her, the echo reverberating through the silence she left behind. Michael dropped to his knees before me, the once proud man now stripped of every shred of dignity. His hands clutched at mine, but I did not return his grip. His forehead pressed against the back of my hand as he begged, his voice breaking with every word. "Emily, don't leave me. Don't throw away everything we've built. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but you're my wife, my life. I can't lose you. Please, please forgive me." I looked down at him, the sight of his collapse both heartbreaking and satisfying. For years I had lived in his shadow, believing his lies, sacrificing pieces of myself to keep our marriage alive. Now he was laid bare, crumbling not because he loved me, but because his carefully curated world was unraveling. I pulled my hand from his grasp, gently, as though even rejection deserved dignity. My voice was steady, quiet, but it carried through the room with a force that silenced every whisper. You already lost me, Michael. Long before tonight. And you didn't even notice. The weight of my words fell heavy. His sobs grew louder, but I turned away, each step I took deliberate, measured. I didn't run, I didn't falter. I walked away from the wreckage of my marriage, from the stares of pity and admiration, from the shattered remains of loyalty I had once held sacred. My heels clicked softly across the floor as I reached the door. Behind me, Michael's cries filled the air, but I didn't turn back. Not once. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. This wasn't just the end of betrayal. It was the beginning of my freedom. I know thousands of women out there have gone through betrayals like this. Don't watch in silence, share this video. Let's remind the world that strong women don't just survive, we rise. The night air outside was cool against my skin, carrying away the heaviness that had clung to me for so long. I inhaled deeply, and for the first time in years, my breath didn't taste of bitterness or regret, it tasted of release. The days that followed were eerily quiet, almost too quiet, like the silence after a storm when the wreckage is finally visible. For so long, my life had been noise, Michael's lies, Rachel's manipulations, my own internal war between suspicion and denial. Now, with the truth spilled across the dinner table like shattered glass, the silence was not peace, it was consequence. The first morning I woke alone, the sun streamed across the bed, spilling over the empty space where he used to sleep. For a fleeting moment, I felt the ache of absence. But then I remembered, not absence, freedom. My hands didn't tremble when I reached for the phone. I had already spoken to my lawyer, and this morning the papers were filed. Divorce. Final, legal, undeniable. It wasn't just a word. It was the severing of chains I'd worn far too long. I wasn't cruel. I didn't scream or demand revenge in courtrooms. I simply enforced what I had put in place years ago, back when a younger, more cautious version of me had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. At the time, Michael had laughed at me, teased me about not trusting him fully. But he signed without protest. That paper, once tucked away in a file I rarely thought about, became my shield. With it, everything I had built before him, my investments, my inheritance, my work, remained untouchable. He couldn't touch a cent of it. He walked into the courtroom with bravado, but he walked out stripped of entitlement, staring down the reality of his own financial ruin. Rachel's fall came just as swiftly. She had always thrived in the social circles I introduced her to, networking with my contacts, weaving herself into professional opportunities one had generously handed her. But the moment the truth spread, and it spread fast, those doors slammed shut. People whispered about betrayal, about lines crossed that no one forgave. Clients she had charmed now avoided her like poison. The job she had fought so hard to keep evaporated overnight, because trust, once broken, cannot be pieced back together with excuses. I didn't need to lift a finger. Their own choices carved their punishment. I simply stepped aside and let consequence do its work. But consequences don't just fall on the guilty. They linger in the hearts of the wounded too. I won't pretend I walked away untouched. Nights were heavy. I lay awake replaying the years I had given, wondering how I hadn't seen it sooner. Therapy became my refuge. I sat across from a kind-eyed woman who let me pour out my anger, my grief, my shame. She didn't judge me for staying as long as I had, or for loving a man who had betrayed me. She helped me see that betrayal doesn't define the betrayed. It defines the betrayer. Slowly I began to rebuild. I started small. Morning walks in the park, breathing deeply without feeling suffocated. Journaling the fragments of my thoughts, words I once suppressed, now flowing freely onto paper. I reconnected with friends I had pushed aside, women who reminded me of my worth when I struggled to see it for myself. The healing wasn't linear. Some days anger bubbled up like fresh fire. Other days loneliness sat beside me, quiet and heavy. But beneath it all there was growth, steady, undeniable growth. For years I had seen myself through Michael's eyes, always questioning, always doubting. Now, for the first time in a long time, I saw myself clearly. Strong, resilient, worthy. One afternoon, I found myself standing before a mirror. I had avoided my reflection for months, afraid of the woman I might see staring back. But this time, I didn't flinch. My eyes were tired, yes, but they were sharper. My face carried the traces of pain, but also of survival. And survival is its own kind of beauty. The divorce was finalized. The house was mine. My future was mine. Michael was left with little more than the weight of his own choices. Rachel disappeared from the circles she once flaunted herself in, her name reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in hushed voices. And me? I stepped into a new chapter. Not defined by betrayal, but by the power of choosing myself. Healing isn't glamorous. It's messy and slow, but it's real. And in that reality, I found closure. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that transforms it into strength. Because in the end, the affair did not destroy me. It revealed me. Betrayal cuts deep. It slices into parts of you didn't even know could bleed. But I learned something through it all. Wounds don't only come from the lies spoken, or the acts committed. Sometimes the sharpest weapon is silence. Silence when you choose not to fight for someone who doesn't deserve you. Silence when you walk away instead of begging. Silence when you let your dignity speak louder than revenge ever could. That night, as I sat at that dinner table, chaos erupting around me, I raised my glass. Not to them, not to the fragments of promises broken, but to myself. To my freedom. To the woman who finally realized she did not need to be saved by anyone. Least of all the man who betrayed her. In the quiet that followed, I discovered strength I had forgotten I carried. I found power not in screaming, not in demanding justice, but in reclaiming my own life. Sometimes the loudest statement you can make is to move forward with grace, leaving behind those who tried to shatter you, knowing they will forever live in the ruins they created. I won't say the journey was easy. Healing demanded patience, demanded that I look into the mirror and face the scars without shame. But I stand here now, not broken, not diminished, reborn. And to every woman listening, hear me when I say this. Your worth is not determined by the ones who fail to see it. Your value does not shrink, because someone else could not honor it. Strength is not in revenge, it's in dignity. Power is not in bitterness, it's in self-respect. And freedom is not given, it's claimed. If my story touched you, don't just leave quietly. Like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Betrayal is painful, but healing begins when we stop hiding the truth.